evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Well, they finally got Big Orange. You were starting to think it could never happen. How could it happen? Once you accuse a man of racism and fascism and sexism, embezzlement, perjury, sex crimes, mental illness, treason, the last of which, by the way, is a death penalty offense, let us remind you, and then you impeach him twice on unrelated grounds, and after that you send the FBI to his home to seize a handwritten welcome letter from Barack Obama, which turns out to be a state secret, possession of which is a serious felony. After you do all of that, and they have, you wouldn't think there'd be a lot left to accuse the guy of. You'd think they'd have run out of sins. Oh, but no. It turns out there's one left, and it's the big one. The crime of all crimes, an offense so diabolical, so morally repugnant, so contrary to the laws of God and nature, that once revealed to the public, Donald Trump is done forever. He will never again darken the door of American democracy. He will slink back in shame to his lair off the 5th tee to prepare for his well-deserved punishment. We won't see him again until sentencing. That's how bad this is. What, ladies and gentlemen, did Donald Trump do? We can now tell you. Donald Trump created the COVID vaccine. He did that himself and on purpose, with malice aforethought. The vax is Donald Trump's doing. We learned that this week from Democrats in Congress. They announced that shocking news. An investigation by the Coronavirus Subcommittee found, as Politico put it, that the Trump administration pressured the Food and Drug Administration to authorize the first COVID-19 vaccines on an accelerated timeline. Following this? An accelerated timeline. They didn't even fully test the stuff. That's not science. Donald Trump doesn't do science. So they just handed this stuff out to people, citizens, recklessly. In the words of South Carolina Congressman James Clyburn, Donald Trump assaulted our nation's public health institutions with this poison, this so-called vaccine, and in doing so, quote, undermined our nation's coronavirus response. That's what Trump did. And here's the worst part. No one knew Trump was doing it. They trusted Donald Trump. He was the president of the United States. People believed him when he said the vax worked, especially older people. They knew they were at risk, and they wanted to believe that a shot would keep them safe. So they took Donald Trump's word, and then they took the vax. And then a lot of them got COVID anyway. It's horrifying when you think about it. Here is one of Donald Trump's elderly victims.
Hey folks, guess you heard this morning I tested positive for COVID, but I've been double vaccinated, double boosted. Symptoms are mild, and I really appreciate your inquiries and your concerns. But I'm doing well. I'm getting a lot of work done. I'm going to continue to get it done.
Look at that man. Donald Trump's vaccine did that to him. 4 shots, a human pincushion, now a desiccated husk. Before he took Donald Trump's vaccine, that man was spry, filled with vigor and vim, famous for his mental acuity. Look at him now. And in case you think, oh, maybe we're overstating the case, maybe this is just a bad video, we're going to take you now to a live shot of that same man to give you some sense of the long-term effects of Donald Trump's vaccine. Here he is speaking at this moment in the state of Maryland. Watch this.
Social Security into the hands of Ted Cruz and Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean it. But it's not just Social Security. Senator Scott wants everything in the federal budget voted on de novo every 5 years it goes out of existence. That includes Medicare, veterans benefits, and everything else. And then along comes Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. This is what they put this in.
Marjorie Taylor Greene controls Social Security? It doesn't make sense. The compassionate person in you feels for that man because you know what happened to him. He took Donald Trump's vaccine, which Democrats alerted us this week wasn't properly tested. Now, your first reaction may be, wait a second, this seems like a revision of what I saw personally. Wasn't it Joe Biden who promoted the vaccine, who made it mandatory? Wasn't Joe Biden in charge when it became obvious the vaccine didn't work? And didn't Joe Biden's media tell us to get the shot months after Donald Trump left office? You may remember that, possibly because you remember clips like this. This is from July of last year.
If you're a school teacher, if you're a nurse, if you're a cop, you need to get vaccinated. And if you don't, you need to look for another job.
Yeah, take the vax or you're fired. In retrospect, it's pretty obvious they were carrying water for Donald Trump in that video. Now, if you're still not convinced, you're probably a cynical person. You probably have concluded that Democrats are panicked about being blamed for the single greatest public health disaster in history, and they're trying to shift the blame to Donald Trump before the full truth about the vaccine comes out. And it is coming out, and the midterms are on the way. You may have concluded that. But we're not cynical on this show. In fact, we're relieved. Now that Donald Trump is responsible for the vaccine, we can finally talk about the vaccine. Till now, we haven't been able to. Till now, it's been like living in a John Cheever story, where the entire country is an emotionally repressed WASP family. It's 1952 in Darien, and Dad is just passed out drunk at the dinner table. But nobody's allowed to mention it. We all have to pretend it's not happening. Dad's fine, be quiet. Over time, that level of denial is very hard to sustain. It makes you crazy. But thank God it's over now. Now that we can blame Donald Trump for the vaccine, we can finally tell the truth about the vaccine without being fired or attacked or thrown off the internet. We really should have thought of this earlier because it feels good, the freedom of this. So let's take a moment to talk about Donald Trump's vaccine and why it seems to be, among other things, dramatically raising death rates among young people. According to data from New Zealand, the government there, for example, children who were vaccinated between the ages of 10 and 19 were more likely, not less likely, more likely to die within a month of vaccination than those who didn't take the vaccine in the same age group. And it's not just the New Zealand government that has found this. This summer, a Dutch researcher called Andre Radair published a paper entitled COVID-19 Vaccinations and All-Cause Mortality. The research analyzed hundreds of cities and towns. What did it find? Quote, "We could not observe a mortality-reducing effect of vaccination in Dutch municipalities after vaccination and booster campaigns. We did find a 4 sigma significant mortality enhancing effect during the 2 periods of high unexplained excess mortality." Oh, so the data suggest, don't prove, but suggest the vaccine may be killing people. Unexplained mortality is also on the rise in many other countries, Australia, England, Wales. So why is Donald Trump's vaccine doing all of this in other countries? Well, we can't be sure. But as Alex Berenson reported on his Substack recently, the Canadian government is seeing a similar problem at huge scale. As of this summer, people who took Donald Trump's vaccine in the Canadian province of Manitoba are roughly 50% more likely than the unvaccinated to be hospitalized or die from COVID. Again, to pause. How bad is Donald Trump's vaccine? So bad that people who take it are more likely to die of COVID. Now, we have data from more Canadian provinces, but they seem to be hiding it now. On July 28th, the province of British Columbia announced it would stop reporting the number of deaths that occurred in people who have taken the COVID booster. Wow, why is that? Don't ask, you're not allowed to. Oh, we are now, because it's a Trump crime. The charts are also missing somehow from the Internet Archive, which is widely known, of course, as a front for Russian operatives working on behalf of who? Donald Trump. But we do have the most recent available data. What did those show? Well, they showed that 70% of all deaths in that province occurred in people who were boosted, even though boosted individuals make up just half the province's population. Do the math on that for a minute. Well, your first reaction might be, oh, well, vaccinated and boosted people tend to be older, so of course they're dying at a greater rate. It has nothing to do with the shot. But then you look deeper. You read, for example, the Lancet article entitled Risk of Infection, Hospitalization, and Death Up to 9 months After a Second Dose of the COVID-19 Vaccine. And that piece shows that people over the age of 80 have worse outcomes. And by worse, we mean more hospitalizations, more deaths when they're vaccinated than when they are unvaccinated. So it turns out, when Donald Trump told you, as he did hundreds of times, certainly you must remember this, that this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated, it turned out to be exactly the opposite. And we're seeing this in a lot of different places, in a lot of different data sets. In fact, as Kenji Yamamoto wrote in the Journal of Virology, quote, "The Lancet study showed that immune function among vaccinated individuals 8 months after the administration of 2 doses of COVID-19 vaccine was lower than that among unvaccinated individuals." Well, that sounds like it's hurting people's immune system in a profound way. As the Journal of Food and Chemical Toxicology put it after an independent study, quote, "Vaccination introduces a profound impairment in type 1 interferon signaling, which has diverse adverse consequences to human health. Well, that doesn't sound good. What consequences could they be talking about? Well, in July, the German government put out a tweet stating that at least 1 out of every 5,000 COVID shots causes, quote, serious side effects. 1 in 5,000, really? This is a shot that was taken by hundreds of millions of people, including in this country. What effects are they talking about? Well, those would include decreased sperm counts. The journal Andrology reported in June that there was a 22% average drop in total sperm count in samples taken 3 to 5 months after the second Pfizer dose of the vax. Donald Trump's vax. On top of that, there is heart inflammation, myocarditis, which is now suddenly famous in neighborhoods across the country because everyone seems to know someone else's son who has it. In December of last year, researchers at Oxford found that, quote, myocarditis risk was increased during 1 to 28 days following a third dose of the vaccine. Associations were strongest in males younger than 40 years for all vaccine types. But you knew that because you're seeing it among people you know. And no one's talking about it. We're not allowed to talk about it, but now we can because Trump did it. Researchers in Israel, meanwhile, found that vaccination increased the 42-day risk of myocarditis by a factor of 3. This is a very serious heart condition, not a small finding. Now, you may have also noticed the rise in young athletes dying of heart attacks in recent months, something you're not allowed to notice, but you probably can't help yourself. For example, a 37-year-old cycling champion in Scotland called Rab Wardell just died of a heart attack 2 days after winning a national mountain biking championship. Can't say he was out of shape. Maybe it wasn't vax-related. Have you seen that a lot before? And then there were those 5 doctors you may have read about in Toronto who died in the same month, in July. Now, of that group of 5 dead physicians, there was a 27-year-old triathlete who died after a swimming competition and a 50-year-old Olympian who died after a run. So these are not people who are sitting on the couch smoking weed and eating Doritos. Now, we can't know why all of this happened, but the point is we're allowed to notice now. And that's significant, especially since some places are still forcing children to take the vaccine. And that would include most colleges in the United States. They just announced that boosters are mandatory. In the District of Columbia, which is falling apart, the mayor has decided, she declared this today, that unvaccinated students will not be allowed in school. They won't even get virtual learning unless they take a vaccine. Donald Trump's vaccine, that appears to be hurting a lot of people. But unless they take it, they will get no education whatsoever. Who knew that Muriel Bowser, the resolutely partisan Democrat who runs Washington, D.C., was actually working for Donald Trump, but she appears to be. At least you know who to blame. If Alex Berenson had known that 2 years ago, he would have saved himself a lot of trouble. Alex Berenson, of course, is one of the people who's brought us this information. He's the author of Pandemia. He's also on Substack. He joins us now. Alex Berenson, don't you think, in retrospect, it would have been wise to declare yourself part of the resistance 2 years ago as you begun your reporting journey on this, and you never would have been booted off Twitter, and you could have just said what you wanted to say?
I'm definitely part of the resistance, Tucker. I'm just not sure who I'm resisting these days.
That is a good point.
So you brought up a lot of interesting data points, and I'm not going to mention where you might have found them, although alexberenson.substack.com is a good place to look.
Probably so.
The reason I say this is because today, so all this stuff people can they can say, oh, myocarditis, you can get that after COVID. And, that Japanese doctor who wrote, that's one person, who cares? There's one data point that cannot be just waved away, period, okay? And that is all-cause mortality. It is the total death count, whether it's in the United States or Europe or Australia. Governments are good at counting their citizens being born and dying. And
That's
what
right.
we have seen for this year in Europe, and this is my top Substack story today, which is why I'm mentioning it, is week after week, European countries are reporting above average all-cause deaths. As of this moment in Europe, there are more excess deaths in 2022, which is post-vaccination, than in either 2021 or 2020 when COVID was supposed to be ravaging Europe. And no one has offered a good explanation for why this is.
So I don't understand, given those data, which are, I think, indisputable, we can argue about what they mean, but they certainly suggest something profound and terrifying is going on. In the face of those data, How can governments and schools in the United States be mandating the vax? Why isn't there an instant stop on this? And why is no one trying to figure out what the hell's going on?
As for the first point, I have no idea. Nobody under 30 should be getting this. I mean, I've said that for a while, but it's indisputably true. And as for why we're not looking into it, I think we both know the answer to that. The answer might be very uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, we just blame Trump. This is really one of the great stories of our age, and I appreciate your doggedness in covering it. Alex Berenson, thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
Kind of a shocking admission from Mark Zuckerberg. Turns out the FBI dramatically interfered with the 2020 presidential election. Dramatically, unequivocally. This was election interference by the country's biggest law enforcement agency, says Mark Zuckerberg. Remarkable. We've got details for you. Then Andrew Tate was kicked off not just the internet, but everywhere this week. You're not supposed to listen to Andrew Tate for some reason. We wondered why. What does Andrew Tate have to say that they don't want you to hear? We're open-minded, and so we sat down with him at length, and that interview's coming up. This is a Fox News alert, and we're not overselling that. This actually is a blockbuster story. So the CEO of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, just went on the Joe Rogan podcast. And while speaking to Rogan, he admitted that Facebook censored the New York Post's accurate reporting on Hunter Biden's laptop, which of course we all knew, but that Facebook did that because the FBI intervened and told Facebook that that laptop was Russian disinformation. And of course, how would Zuckerberg know? They believe the FBI. Now, keep in mind, the FBI had Hunter Biden's laptop when they said that. They've had it since 2019. So when the FBI told Facebook that on the eve of a presidential election, they knew it was a lie. They interfered in the last presidential election. If ever there was an attack on democracy, it's the country's largest law enforcement agency weighing in a dishonest way 3 weeks before the voting begins. Here's a clip.
There was a lot of attention on Twitter during the election because of the Hunter Biden laptop story. The New York Post.
Yeah, we had that too.
Yeah, so you guys censored that as well?
So we took a different path than Twitter. I mean, basically, the background here is the FBI, I think, basically came to us, some folks on our team, and was like, hey, just so you know, like, you should be on high alert. There was we thought that there was a lot of Russian propaganda in the 2016 election. We have it on notice that basically there's about to be
Yeah, so you guys censored that as well?
So we took a different path than Twitter. I mean, basically, the background here is the FBI, I think, basically came to us, some folks on our team, and was like, hey, just so you know, like, you should be on high alert. There was we thought that there was a lot of Russian propaganda in the 2016 election. We have it on notice that basically there's about to be
Yeah, so you guys censored that as well?
So we took a different path than Twitter. I mean, basically, the background here is the FBI, I think, basically came to us, some folks on our team, and was like, hey, just so you know, like, you should be on high alert. There was we thought that there was a lot of Russian propaganda in the 2016 election. Some folks on our team, and was like, hey, just so you know, like, you should be on high alert. There was we thought that there was a lot of Russian propaganda in the 2016 election. We have it on notice that basically there's about to be some kind of dump of that's similar to that. So just be vigilant.
So the FBI censored the story. Just to recap, in case you didn't live in this country prior to 2 years ago, that's not allowed. You're not allowed to do that. That is election interference. That is an attack on democracy by our most powerful domestic government agency. It's unbelievable. It defies belief. We actually put in a request to Facebook to see the communications from the FBI to Facebook. We have a right to see it. We hope that they'll send them to us. Keep in mind that in October of 2020, a Facebook executive and Democratic Party operative called Andy Stone claimed that Facebook was blocking the story, quote, as part of our standard process to reduce the spread of misinformation. So they didn't tell us that the FBI had told them it was Russian disinformation. Again, when the FBI knew perfectly well that it wasn't. Harmeet Dillon has watched all of this from the very beginning. She's the country's premier civil rights lawyer, founder of the Center for American Liberty, joining us tonight. Harmeet, thanks for coming on. This seems like a blockbuster and a shocking story to me.
It is shocking, Tucker, but it confirms information that we already had. So, for example, I already sued Twitter after the election for taking speakers down, including my client, Rogan O'Hanley. And it turned out that he was taken down at the request of the California Secretary of State, who was auditioning to become a United States Senator in the Biden administration. And so we filed a lawsuit, went to court, showed the judge all the evidence of how the government was involved in the censorship, and the judge didn't buy it. This case is now pending before the Ninth Circuit, and there have been other instances like this. But hearing it from Mark Zuckerberg's mouth is truly stunning, and I don't know how the government can deny this. So to be clear, the timeline is that just 3 weeks before the 2020 election is when the FBI reached out to Twitter, Facebook, as well as maybe other companies, and said, hey, we heard about this Russian disinformation. You might want to suppress this information on your website. And by the way, when the FBI reaches out to you, taps you on the shoulder, and asks you to do something, that isn't a suggestion. They have subpoenas, they have guns, and they also are from a government that regulates you. And so this is shocking, and it demands an investigation. But it just adds up to the pile of evidence that I've been saying points to a major reorganization or disbanding of the FBI is needed at this point. I don't trust anything that they say.
So just to be totally clear, from a legal perspective, the U.S. government is not allowed to use disinformation to encourage censorship for partisan ends. That's not allowed under the Constitution,
right.
Correct?
Okay. Tucker, it's a violation of the First Amendment for the government to engage in censorship, quite clearly. And by the way, who needs Russian disinformation when we have our own? We have our own disinformation coming from the FBI and our own government. And this is not trivial just because it's being done to the other side. Anybody could control the FBI, or some forces can get in there and decide they don't like Joe Biden. Are they going to go out there and start spreading misinformation or suppressing information that's truthful about the Biden administration? I don't like that either. This cannot be allowed. We cannot let our law enforcement do this, and we've seen it before. So this is not the country that we want to be living in, Tucker.
No, it's not. Harmeet Dillon, thank you so much. So it's now a crime, of course, to say that the last election was rigged. We haven't said that. Mark Zuckerberg just admitted the last election was rigged by the FBI for the benefit of Joe Biden. Mark Zuckerberg said that. So when is the director of the FBI going to explain? So Andrew Tate was one of the biggest people on the internet, and then a couple days ago he disappeared. Old people like us hadn't heard about him, but it turns out young people knew a lot about Andrew Tate. He's now been accused of all kinds of crimes, none of which he's been charged with. But we thought if they don't want us to hear Andrew Tate talk, maybe he's worth listening to, and he turned out to be very worth listening to. Our interview with him, straight ahead. Andrew Tate is a former kickboxer who's built up a truly enormous following on social media. Until a couple months ago, we'd never heard of him. And then the other day, virtually every tech company on the planet banned him. Not just his presence, but also his ability to conduct business on the internet. He was taken off Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, all of it. Then they started telling you that not only was he not allowed to talk, but that you weren't allowed to like him because he was an incredibly bad person. And our view on that always is we'll decide for ourselves, since we're adults and Americans, and we'll listen to anyone we want, and we'll come to any conclusion we care to come to about what that person is about. So we sat down at some length and talked to Andrew Tate, and we wanted to show you some of it so you could make up your own mind, which you're still allowed to do as far as we're concerned. Here's part of the interview.
I don't really feel like I've exposed anything. Like, I'm truly not a very political person. This is the first time someone's experienced this level of ban. I'm not particularly right wing. I don't vote. I mean, I obviously have my own personal views, but they didn't ban me for that. They banned me simply because I had large swaths of the population agreeing to very traditional masculine values. Teenage men and young men, 22, 23, 24, were looking up to me and aspiring to be like me. I have a very traditionally masculine life. I have fast cars and a big house and a lot of money and a beautiful girlfriend. And they thought this was very, very threatening. And for some reason, they decided that it's better if they annihilate me from the internet and replace me with somebody who's more aligned with whatever they're trying to purport.
Tell us what your message is to young men.
Yeah, so I think that being a man is very, very difficult. I think that men's issues are largely overlooked. The people in charge of the world pretend to care, but when somebody who's championing men's issues like myself comes forward and finally manages to garner huge percentiles of the public support, I'm silenced. So they're not really interested in men's issues. And there's a lot of young men growing up today that feel very disaffected. They feel invisible. The agendas that are being forced down their throats are not agendas they align with or they feel affinity to or agendas they want. And I basically just say to men, look, it's a very hard life. You're going to need to get up, work hard, go to the gym. Strong body is a strong mind. You're going to have to reject listening blindly to everything you're told, reject the slave mind, think for yourself, get a strong network of brothers, work aside them. Don't tolerate low quality people in your life, which means don't tolerate men who just smoke drugs and play video games, or men who are disloyal or dishonest. By extension, don't tolerate women or girlfriends who are disloyal or dishonest, and try and build and create a reality full of high quality people in which you can resist the programming that the Matrix tries to influence you with, and grow up truly happy. And what happens is when I say these things, they ignore 95% of what I say. They ignore me saying that you need to avoid low quality men, and they take the bit where I say avoid women who are dishonest, and then they put it on a reel, a very short 3 or 4 second clip, and then they say I'm a misogynistic person and I'm dangerous to women and I need to be banned. The problem is that the majority of young men in the world today are completely invisible, and social media has made them invisible. If you go into an Instagram feed, you have extremely beautiful women, which is fine. They're beautiful, they're allowed to take pictures. But the only men who have followers are men with massive social status, right? Men with Ferraris and money, or rappers, or people who have YouTube channels, interesting people. If you're a normal man with a normal job, you don't really exist in the online world. It's very difficult to get followers. Nobody replies to your DMs. You don't really matter. You don't have access to the sexual marketplace. It's very difficult for you to even get any kind of recognition that you're even alive. And a lot of men feel lost and lonely because of that. And I was championing to a degree their issues by saying to them, look, that is unfair perhaps, but that's the way the game works. You need to become a man of importance. You need to become a man of influence, or you're going to suffer the pain of being invisible forever. Here is how you do it. I wasn't trying to change the rules of the game. I was just telling the men how to win, because I came from nothing and I'm completely and utterly self-made. And I think the reason a lot of men are so depressed is because they feel invisible. They feel like the life is too hard. Women expect me to be strong and smart and funny and interesting with a nice apartment and a fast car and tall and well connected and funny, and it's just too much for them to handle. And the social pressure on men is absolutely immense. And I was championing their issues. And at the same time, all these social media platforms pretend to care. As soon as somebody they resonate with stands up and champions their issues, they mass blanket ban me, which shows they have absolutely no care for the young men of the world today. They think that by banning me, I'm just going to vanish and the young men are just going to go and start eating the gruel that they're fed on their YouTube feed. They don't want to read. They don't want to see transgender people wear makeup. They don't want to see that. They want to see a man who has a bunch of money and a nice life and some fast cars and is strong and is confident. They want an action hero. And that's something that large portions of the world still want to be. And YouTube and social media platforms obviously just don't like the idea of that. They want to get rid of me and try and replace me with something they see as far more malleable, trying to create people which are more malleable and more easy to program and more easy to control.
So news accounts in the United States say that the U.S. Embassy in Bucharest, Romania, was tipped off to your misdeeds and alerted the local authorities you might be committing human trafficking. Given that this is the same charge they leveled against Julian Assange or a species of it, skeptical, but I want to know the details. Were you arrested for human trafficking? What happened?
Yeah, I was not arrested. So what happened is I suffered from a case of swatting. It's very popular with people who are large on the internet. Many large YouTubers have been swatted. It's where you call the police and you say somebody has a gun or there's a hostage situation and the SWAT team arrives. Somebody made a phone call to the American embassy saying that I was holding women at my house. The police arrived. And let me state this now. I state this openly to the world. I have absolute respect for the police. I would hate to live in a country where if you call the police saying women are being held against their will, that the police don't respond. That would be terrible. Of course they should come and look. Absolutely. They turned up. They investigated. They realized that nobody was in the house against their will. There was no crime committed. They said, okay, you're not a suspect, but you are a witness to this, along with me, my brother, the housekeeper, the gardener. Everybody who was in the premises at the time was labeled a witness. We had to go to the police station for 45 minutes for pieces of paper. We filled them in and we were let go. I was swatted. Nobody was hurt. There's no human trafficking. There's no women who were tied up. There's none of these things. It's all just complete fallacy.
You probably made some of these companies mad with your views on COVID. So sum up for us, if you would, what you think the response to COVID globally did to the populations of the West.
Yeah, so I certainly made them mad with my views on COVID. I don't want to go to conspiracy theory, and I would also never kill myself. Let me just say that here for the record. But okay. At the time of COVID first being announced, my brother and I decided we sat and had a very logical conversation, and we sat and said, we're two young fighting age males. If COVID can kill us, then the world is over. It's zombie apocalypse time. So there's no point hiding. We may as well go out with a bang. So my brother and I flew to Stockholm, Sweden. Now, I don't know if many people know this, but Sweden never closed down. Stockholm and Sweden never closed down, never made you wear masks, never mandated the vaccine. At the very beginning of COVID, when the rules were strictest, when Florida was still closed, when Miami was still closed, when the Republican states were still closed, Stockholm, Sweden was wide open with full nightclubs and a party scene like you've never seen. And we lived in Sweden for 3 solid months with zero restrictions, zero worry or interest in COVID. It was like the world was completely normal. And from there, when we left, obviously COVID was still going on. And in a neighboring country, you go to Germany, and they were having full panic attacks, genuine panic attacks if you didn't have a mask on. And it was just very obvious to me. I was like, I've spent the last 3 months ignoring this and I'm fine. And now I'm in Germany surrounded by panic attacks and endless masks. This doesn't make sense. And I told the truth on social media. I said, this is obviously an overreaction. The decimation of your income, the fact you can't go get a doctor's appointment for a genuine ailment or a genuine risk of cancer, for example, the fact that you can't see your loved ones in their final days, these things are far more destructive than the common cold. I think that what they're doing is unfair. I think it's a massive overreaction. And this is based on my personal experience. And I think at the time there was a lot of pushback, but I would like to think now that 99% of the world see I was totally right. You know, it's kind of funny, Tucker. I'll tell you, when at the height of COVID, I used to say to my brother, how will people struggle with the cognitive dissonance when this is all over? Because COVID is still out there. Nothing's gone away. The thing that we were all hiding from is still right there, out there to get you. But now everyone walks around and they're not scared of it anymore. And I'm like, are people critical enough to analyze themselves and say, for a year of my life, I was deathly afraid of something. Now I'm exposing myself to said thing and I'm not afraid anymore. The media tricked me and I was a fool. But they're not. They don't even seem to self-analyze and go, I got tricked. They're just like, oh, okay, next thing. Hey, Andrew now. Like robots. It's mind-bending to me, truly.
So I saw you compare the experience of rich people under COVID, you're one of them, to everybody else. What did you notice about that? It seemed like a two-tiered response.
Yeah, so the story was very simple. I was flying inside of Europe. There's a lot of low-cost air air carriers. It's only low cost primarily. There's not much first class, business class, anything like that. And I was flying, and my experience was plagued by endless paperwork, wearing a mask, put the mask over your nose. Every time you eat, you have to put the mask on in between. I got told off for not having the mask up high enough. I got told off for drinking too long because my mask wasn't on. Pure panic and chaos. And because I'm fortunate enough to be fiscally secure, from there I decided I'll just buy private jets from now on. Comes hard and fast. You lose your Facebook, then your Instagram, then your Gmail, then your Discord, then your website hosting, then your domain name, then your payment processor, then your bank. Then it's just like in real time, you're watching your phone and apps just exploding. Boom, boom, boom. It's crazy.
Andrew Tate, you don't have to agree with everything a man says to believe he has a right to speak in public, and we do believe that. No one gets to tell you who you can watch. No one gets to tell you what you have to think. No one gets to tell you who you have to hate. You're an American and an adult. You can make those decisions yourself. So why don't they want you to hear from Andrew Tate? They really think he's a worse influence on the youth than, say, Cardi B. Tell us how. They're telling us he's a criminal. Okay. Has he been charged? Who are the victims? What are their names? It's going to take a lot more than that to have us believe he should be canceled, or anyone else, by the way. We're against censorship, period. And more than anything, we're in favor of people making up their own minds based on the evidence, like adults do. So if you're interested, you can watch the full unedited interview with Andrew Tate after the show on Fox Nation. Of course, Tate's not the only person who's being censored. Virtually everyone's being censored. The Pentagon now punishing service members for liking the wrong tweets. It's not Stalinism or anything, don't worry. Lieutenant Colonel Stu Scheller knows this well. He was fired for being the one man in command to criticize the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. He's just written a brand new book, and we're honored to have him on next. Government that have the guns, and they want to control them completely, not just what they do, but what they think. So the Pentagon, with that in mind, is now barring service members from liking or sharing social media posts that in any way criticize the administration, including those by Lieutenant Colonel Stu Scheller. Now, Scheller, you remember, was fired for being the one man in command to criticize the disastrous exit from Afghanistan. Lieutenant Colonel Stu Scheller is a brave man, is a former Marine, author of the new book, Crisis on Command. He joins us tonight. We sure appreciate your coming on once again. So you personally have not only been separated from the Marine Corps, but banned. No one can like your tweets?
Tucker, great to be back on. Yes, the DoD has a standing order that no one can like, share, or engage with my content. That is correct.
So you spent your life in the Marine Corps as an officer. This is a new thing, correct? It wasn't always like this? Just a reality check?
Right, yeah, obviously I made 17 years sitting battalion commander, not saying whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. I made a decision that at a certain point, we have to look at the system and make decisions that we think are within our values and best for the system. So I did everything I did out of love for the Marine Corps, love for the Marines, but I think there was a hard conversation that needed to take place about our senior leaders.
For sure. And what happened to you for telling the truth, the obvious truth that everyone knew? It was one of the most depressing things, I think, that has happened under the Biden administration. Reassure us and tell us there are still active duty members of the Marine Corps who sympathize with you, who admire you for what you did.
Yeah, there are still a ton of great, talented officers in the Marine Corps. This whole extremism thing is a distraction. Lloyd Austin, I'd ask you, how many wars have we lost based on extremism? The answer is 0. How many wars have we lost based on poor leadership, poor strategy? The answer is a lot. Perhaps we should take a look at the poor leadership that we have right now. So the leaders that I have that are still in the military that are contacting me, I know you're looking for ways to make a change, but I think right now is the time in American history where we have to look at the problems in the military and have hard conversations about the truth that we can also obviously see.
Every time you're on, I find it inspiring and upsetting at the same time. Congratulations on the book, Lieutenant Colonel Stu Scheller, a true hero, a truly brave man. Thank you. More news in a moment. Self, and you can on Fox Nation right now, the full interview. Of course, we'll be back, as we always are, 8 p.m. weeknights. Here's Sean Hannity. Wait, that's not Sean Hannity. That's Pete Hegseth.
Great
Pete Hegseth.
It isn't.
I
snuck up on you. I snuck up on you, brother.
I
like
love
to
it.
do that. Little ambush.
Thanks.
Little ambush at 9 p.m. Tucker, great show. Thanks
so
a lot.
Good. See you, Pete.
All right, welcome to this special edition of Hannity. As Tucker said, I'm Pete Hegseth in tonight for Sean. And we begin with breaking news from South Florida. Today, Judge Bruce Reinhart ordered the DOJ to unseal a redacted version of that affidavit used to justify the Mar-a-Lago raid. Federal officials now have until noon tomorrow to make this affidavit public. Here now with the very latest, Fox News contributor Jonathan Turley. Jonathan, thanks for being here. You know how to break this stuff down. We could get this redacted affidavit at any moment. We were preparing on this show to potentially release it. Will we be waiting until noon, and what do you think we'll see?
Well, we could be waiting until noon. I must admit I'm skeptical. You know, this was the same department that said that not a single word of this redacted, of this affidavit should be released. And on the first attempt, they were able to miraculously hit the Goldilocks point of getting it just right, because it appears that the judge did not push back on any sections. And for those of us who've litigated against this department over redactions and over classifications, there is a certain degree of skepticism that left to its own devices, they maximized what could be released. But I'm still grateful that something will be released. I'm hoping, truly, that Attorney General Garland saw that the earlier position was wrong. And he went to the department and said, let's try to be as transparent as possible. I mean, after all, this affidavit doesn't likely contain a lot of good sections for Donald Trump. Affidavits aren't like that. These are one-sided accounts that make the case for searches and seizures. So it's not like I'm worried that they are only redacting the stuff that's good for Donald Trump. But I'm hoping that they see this as a moment to break from tradition, to have greater transparency, and we will see tomorrow.
So the reflex from the DOJ would probably be to take a page full of words and make it nothing. But you're saying potentially there's an incentive from the DOJ because of the blowback to, redacting names and sensitive information, provide more information about why they did it. So